Hey, this is Alex Head, founder of Subtext Radio.
This is Subtext.
Please go ahead and click the like button and the subscribe button. It really helps us to reach new audiences and promote the artists that we work with. Hit like and hit subscribe.
Subtext. Hello. Welcome to the 10th broadcast from Subtext on Threads Radio. This is also our first 2-day pop-up event. You can support the work we do and get a free mystery gift at our contribute page on subtextradio.net. The first 3 shows for you today begin with a new work that explores the internal and emotional reordering engendered by solitary labor. Incoming, by Alex Head, explores sonic landscapes while documenting the direct aural impact of social distancing on broadcast radio. This will be followed by Sparks, a new work from Kathy Hoffer, who works across various media with elements of personal and local biography, narrative, and mise-en-scène. Sparks is a radio essay on times, spaces, and affects in motion. And then we have 2 episodes from Nothing to See Here by David Clark, an experimental radio art show produced by David in collaboration with students at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design University, plus special guests. He'll be in conversation with Subtext's Alex Head. Thank you for listening.
Hello and welcome. I hope that after last week many of you have been inspired to diffuse the stress of being cooped up by responding to our challenge to reread.
Hello, hi, good evening. This is Ian coming with your host Alex Head. Hope you're okay. It has driven radio and podcast indoors to somewhat more makeshift studios.
Hiding under a duvet recording a podcast because I can't leave the house.
You're not actually under the duvet because you're scared, Jim. You're under the duvet to get good sound quality. Let's be honest with people.
I'm not...
I'm also under a duvet.
It has altered the sound of things profoundly, and not only through absence. It can be heard on the mic too.
I suspect you end up with these rather peculiar instances like we've got here. There's a second one, which is a sort of capacity of the British state itself. Again, you're trying to get the thing to work in a way, getting the entire machine to work in a way it's not set up to do, so that the political will isn't really there to crack through things like DWP's ropey universal credit software, which appears to be the hold-up over there, or to think laterally about how you might do this. You know, HMRC have the bank account details.
Lockdown. Fastidiously practicing physical distancing, with James Meadway, former advisor to the Shadow Chancellor and regular economic brain here at Navarra. We've ironed out most of the technical difficulties in recording. It should all be very smooth as a listening experience. You may occasionally hear just the occasional buzz on the line, and my thanks to James for bearing with me and my sometimes patchy boat-based internet too.
And sort of just go to the loo in a little family line. But the public toilets, they used to have a whole row of them, and it was quite a sort of communal enterprise.
Where are you going with this, Anne?
Well, they used to have little pieces of sea sponge on the end of a stick.
Ah.
Lily's looking back at you, great girl.
I need those,
it suddenly
please.
drooped. New sound, GQT, coming in via email and Twitter. So if you're able to articulate that.
Estranged mother. Our afternoon short work is in a moment, and then at 4, last word with Matthew Bannister.
And we're at the Cathkin Braes, which is quite a significant piece of land in the sense that it is open to the public, but is completely untouched. It's noticeably quiet, the air is fresh, but more noticeably there's just a feeling in the air. It's a mixture of trepidation and optimism, and noticeably clearer thinking. That clarity, of course, coming from the hormonal cocktail produced by physical exercise and just being close to nature. Don't know why I've waited until a global pandemic to do something like this. But there you go. Typical city dweller.
I'm here walking now in a space that I've perhaps neglected in recent years, but one which I've very much come to appreciate and value in recent weeks. It's very much a place of in-betweens.
I live out here in the Lincolnshire Fens. Ah, you hear that? That's what they call pheasants. We have lots of them around here. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love walking. I just come across animals all the time. I can hear him. Listen. A massive fox. I'm going home, I've done my time. Now I've got to know what it is and isn't mine. Fly away home to Zion. Fly away home. One bright morning when my work is over, I will fly away.
But what has Corona contributed to our inner worlds? I want to explore some of the internal spaces self-isolation engenders. And in order to do that, I'll have to draw upon my own inner private world, as well as the ones written large online. Romantic impulses going haywire. It has been observed that, during emergency situations, pressure builds up to define what really matters and how we identify with our feelings. As Ashley Fetters observes, for the many people who have chosen the chaotic present moment to make their feelings known, that thin, shining strand of hope might be enough to pull them through. Adam, who chatted with me on Google Hangouts so that his roommate wouldn't overhear a phone conversation, said he'd started having fond feelings a few months ago, but things had really escalated since both his and his roommate's offices had closed. Quote, "Once you start spending 8 to 12 hours a day together, it kind of forces you to confront the things you can't put off with work," unquote, he wrote. Once they were housebound, Adam said, they quickly fell into an everyday routine, working in close quarters, checking in on each other during breaks, taking walks together. This felt so much like a relationship that Adam found himself accidentally describing himself and his roommate as though they were already an item. Quote, "I've definitely slipped the we word into conversation a few times," unquote. I've been fairly explicit about my bisexuality in the past years with a number of people and family. But I have to say that the encroaching containment that was rising up towards us on Friday the 13th of March did encourage me to finally fire up Grindr after a few years and seek out liaison, which I found to be a really important thing to have done at that point in my own timeline, but also within the timeline of confinement, and knowing where you stand with your emotions and your feelings. Emotions then create an active-passive duality, which containment affects, but by no means governs. Though flu viruses have been shown to make carriers twice as socially active. This said, we might just as likely spend our collective quarantine as a species, internalizing, voyaging within, gestating and mutating ourselves. The Atlantic, April 2nd, 2020. The coronavirus's unique threat to the South. More young people in the South seem to be dying of COVID-19. Why? Van R. Newkirk II reports. In a matter of weeks, the coronavirus has gone from a novel, distant threat to an enemy besieging cities and towns across the world. The burden of COVID-19 and the economic upheaval wrought by the measures to contain it feel epochal. Humanity now has a common foe, and we will grow increasingly familiar with its face. Yet plenty of this virus's aspects remain unknown. The developing wisdom, earned the hard way in Wuhan, Washington, and Italy, has been that older people and sicker people are substantially more likely to suffer severe illnesses or die from COVID-19 than their younger, healthier counterparts. Older people are much more likely than young people to have lung disease, kidney disease, hypertension, or heart disease. And those conditions are more likely to transform a coronavirus infection into something nastier. But what happens when these assumptions don't hold up, and the young people battling the pandemic share the same risks? The world is about to find out. So far, about 1 in 10 deaths in the United States from COVID-19 has occurred in the 4-state arc of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, according to data assembled by the COVID-19 Tracking Project, a volunteer collaboration incubated at the Atlantic. New Orleans is on pace to become the next global epicenter of the pandemic. The virus has a foothold in southwest Georgia and threatens to overwhelm hospitals in Atlanta metropolitan area. The coronavirus is advancing quickly across the American South. And in the American South, significant numbers of younger people are battling health conditions to make coronavirus outbreaks more perilous. The numbers emerging seem to indicate that more young people in the South are dying from COVID-19. Although the majority of coronavirus-related deaths in Louisiana are still among victims over 70 years old, 43% of all reported deaths have been people under 70. In Georgia, people up under 70 make up 49% of reported deaths. By comparison, people under 70 account for only 20% of deaths in Colorado. Under 70 is a broad category, not really useful for understanding what's going on, but digging deeper reveals more concerning numbers. In Louisiana, people from the ages of 40 to 59 account for 22% of all deaths. The same age range in Georgia accounts for 17% of all deaths. By comparison, the same age groups account for only about 10% of all deaths in Colorado and 6% of all deaths in Washington state. These statistics suggest that middle-aged and working-age adults in the 2 southern states are at much greater risk than their counterparts elsewhere. For some reason, they are more likely to die from COVID-19. All data in this stage of the pandemic are provisional and incomplete, and all conclusions are subject to change. But a review of the international evidence shows that, as far as we know, the outbreaks currently expanding in the American South are unique, and mainly because of how many people in their working prime are dying. Spain's official accounting of the pandemic last week showed that deaths among people under 70 years old make up only about 12% of the total deaths in the country. Case fertility rates around the world are notoriously tricky because they are based in part on the extent of testing, but a recent study of the outbreak in Wuhan, China found a case fertility rate of 0.5% among adults from the ages of 30 to 59. The current estimate of fertility rates in the same age range in Louisiana is about 4 times that. A recent analysis from the Kaiser Family Foundation might shed some light on what's going on here. The paper, drawing on the CDC guidelines, identifies people who may be at risk of serious complications from COVID-19. Kaiser's at-risk group includes all people over 60 years old and all adults younger than 60 who also have heart disease, cancer, lung disease, or diabetes. In each state, older people are the majority of the people considered to be at risk of complications. But the Deep South and Mid-South form a solid block of states where younger adults are much more at risk. In Arkansas, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, and Mississippi, relatively young people make up over a quarter of the vulnerable population. Compare that with the coronavirus's beachhead in Washington state, where younger adults make up only 19% of the risk group. Tricia Newman, a senior vice president at the Kaiser Family Foundation, says this analysis points to the underlying issues that might complicate or worsen the pandemic in the South. Quote, due to high rates of conditions like lung disease and heart disease and obesity, the people living in these states are at risk if they get the virus, unquote, Newman told me. These aren't, quote, people who are sick, but these are people who have underlying comorbidities that put them at higher risk of serious illness if they get infected, unquote. The KFF analysis doesn't include potential complications from hypertension, which is also suspected to be a driving coronavirus-linked hospitalization. But the data are predictable on that front. If you define Oklahoma as part of the South, southern states fill out the entirety of the top 10 states in percentage of population diagnosed with hypertension by a doctor. Southerners are more likely to suffer from chronic diseases than other Americans, even as Americans are more likely to suffer from chronic disease than citizens of other countries with comparable wealth. According to Newman, these estimates don't include people with cancer or who are immunocompromised. Groups that are also at high risk for serious illness from COVID-19. And cancer mortality rates are highest in southern states. These differences are not innate to Southerners. They are a result of policy. Health disparities tend to track both race and poverty, and the states in the old domain of Jim Crow have pursued policies that ensure those disparities endure. The South is the poorest region in the country. The poor, black, Latino, and rural residents make up large shares of southern populations, and they tend to lack access to high-quality doctors and care. According to the State Health Access Data Assistance Center, Mississippi, North Carolina, Texas, Florida, Georgia, and Louisiana all spend less than $25 per person on public health a year, compared to $84 per person in New York. 9 of the 14 states that have refused to expand Medicaid to poor residents under the Affordable Care Act are in the South, and many of those states are led by Republican leaders who have intimated and continued President Donald Trump's dallying and flip-flopping, and now find themselves flat-footed. The slow response from those governors will be even more ruinous in a region with so many challenges. Chronic disease and the apparent increased risk for younger people from COVID-19 are only part of the story of the South. Other factors could complicate its pandemic response. Advocates have drawn attention to the extreme vulnerability of people in prisons to the coronavirus, and the South incarcerates a larger proportion of its population than anywhere else in the United States. A federal prison in Louisiana has already seen a spike in COVID-19 cases this week. Also, a global fear in this pandemic is that it will sicken health professionals and doctors and leave them unable to contend with a wave of hospitalizations. Southern states have shown some of the lowest ratios of active physicians to patients in the country. In all, the South seems likely to be a new kind of battleground, one in which distancing and isolation are going to be especially important in stopping the virus. Centuries of policy gave the pandemic a head start, and younger targets in the South. Now there are mere days to change course. Van R. Newkirk II is staff writer at The Atlantic, where he covers politics and policy.
Harlem streets stay flooded in white powder, like those motherfuckers running away from the Twin Towers. Gunshots rock the earth like a meteor shower. Bowling for Columbine, fear giving the media power. Innocence devoured like a chicken spot snack box. Government cocaine cooked in the ghetto crack rock. Corrupt cops, false testimony at your arraignment. Check the check, constant struggle to make the payments. Working your whole life wondering where the day went. The subway stays packed like a multicultural slave ship. It's rush hour, 2:30 to 8, non-stopping. And people coming home after corporate sharecropping and fuck flossing. Mothers are trying to feed children, but gentrification is kicking them out of they building a generation of babies born without health care. Families homeless, thrown the fuck off the welfare. Homicide, Harlem, blam, what's the problem? 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 It's like Cambodia, the killing fields uptown. We live in distress and hang the flag upside down. The sound of conservative politicians on television. People in the hood are blind, so they tell us to listen. They vote for us to go to war instantly, but none of their kids serve in the infantry. The odds are stacked against us like a casino. Think about it, most of the army is black and Latino. And if you can't acknowledge the reality of my words, you just another stupid motherfucker out on the curb, trying to escape from the ghetto with your ignorant ways. But you can't read history at an illiterate stage, and you can't raise a family on minimum wage. Why the fuck you think most of us are locked in a cage? I give niggas the truth, cause they pride is indigent. You better off rich and guilty than poor and innocent. But I'm sick of feeling impotent, watching the world burn in the era of apocalypse, waiting my turn. I'm a Harlem nigga that's concerned with the future, and if you're in my way, it'd be an honor to shoot ya, uproot ya with the evil that grows in my people, making them deceitful, cannibalistic and lethal. But I see through the mentality implanted in us, and I educate my fam about who we should trust. Homicide, Harlem, blam, what's the problem? Homicide, Harlem, blam, what's the problem? Homicide, Harlem, blam, what's the problem? Homicide, Harlem, blam, what's the problem?
Finally today, I wanted to include the reflections of Donna Haraway in the recent film by Fabrizio Terranova, Storytelling for Earthly Survival.
Thinking is what we are about, and thinking is a materialist practice with other thinkers, and some of the best thinking is done as storytelling. We, all of us, in this time where the ongoingness of life as we know it, where Gaia is intruding, where the intrusion of that which will no longer be put down threatens ways of life as usual. It doesn't threaten life itself. Life itself will go on for as long as this planet has the right conditions of temperature and moisture and whatever. For microbes are very inventive. It's not like life itself is at stake, but vast ways of life and becoming with each other across peoples and species on this earth are truly at stake. And the rate of extinction of ways of life, ways of living and dying, of peoples of all species, including human, are truly on the ledge, on the edge of falling off into nothingness. If the makers of living and dying on this earth could begin to somehow be at risk to each other, to propose something real, to make a proposition in a sense that Whitehead might mean, that which is not yet but might be, some mode of coherence, which might have a chance. Every scale. Until the stories start getting told like that, and until those who tell the news start hearing where those bits of story are actually being told, where people are actually doing this, but they're not on the news. Maybe just a little bit, maybe very weak. How to make the weak stories stronger and the strong stories weaker. We are speechless to this now, and then we give it bad names. But good thinking always happens at the moment of speechlessness. The only truth that can be told must at its most fundamental level be the failure of naming. It's the failure of giving positive names. It's at that moment of failure that there is some encounter with it, whatever it is, something that's not a lie. One's whole life is in the work, in the writing, in the play. And my life has involved intense, good family. A family with whom I've reproductive family, fathers, brothers, mothers, cousins, and so forth, with whom I feel very strong connection. So it's not about something negative in that regard. Jay, who was a fellow graduate student at Yale University, he was in the history department, and I came to be intensely engaged with each other as friends and lovers, with no model for how to handle that except marriage. I knew Jay was gay. There was never any secret about that. For some reason, it didn't activate jealousy, or I don't know why. There was a way in which Jay and I, for our own reasons, needed to be married, but somehow marriage was seriously the wrong model. And that kind of accreting, making family by making homes, that making kin, making kind. And this was, of course, a period of history where lots of people are experimenting with forms of social and sexual life. Communes of all kinds, love relationships of all kinds. Heteronormative marriage was an object of ridicule and critique. That helps a lot, in one's own explorations. And, Jay's lover, Bob, my lover and husband and friend, Rustin, join. I mean, we got officially divorced, but we could never figure out who got the camera. I couldn't split the property. I don't know. We had a sewing machine and a camera. I'm being facetious. Point is, whatever it was that we did was for life, and in ways that we had no particular models for. And in retrospect, it wasn't all that radical or anything, but it never resolved into the reproductive heteronormative family as a model for a good life. So making kin, making family with each other without the imperative of biological reproduction, and indeed with quite something else, with a kind of cultivating the responsibility to be part of moving the population of this earth to more tolerable levels, and starting in the rich countries. Obviously, I would love to see certain kinds of institutional apparatuses, like being able much more easily to adopt adults, to build legally protected family, to be engaged in city planning and architecture, and to be engaged in the building of rituals that celebrate adulthood with adulthood that involves the decision not to have a child, how to celebrate that as opposed to regard it as a tragedy, while celebrating children too. It's that kind of needing to build a non-heteronormative joy in these kinds of lives. So yeah, it's a lifetime commitment, for sure.
We could do different tests, okay, when it's less liquid inside.
Thank you for listening. That was Ian going out with your host, Alex Head. I wanted to note that other Possible online resources of interest include The Epistemology of the Closet by Eve Kosowski-Sedgwick, the podcasts Nymphowars, Bad Gays, and on Twitter, Dick Girl Diaries and Chica Marks, aka Mackenzie Walk. One of the makers of the Bad Gays podcast, Hugh Lemmy, also has a book called Red Tory, My Corbyn Chemsex Hell, which he is reading passages from. You can find that on Podbean as well as the Bad Gays podcast. It's pretty hardcore, but I do recommend it. Good night and good subtext.
Camille 1 was born in a community that had decided that at least 3 parents were going to be required for every new baby. And having a baby was not something someone could just decide to do. It was rather a collective decision, so that folks who wanted to bear babies or bring babies into the world might well have to wait or might never be able to do so, but they could participate as parents in a family raising a baby. So that Camille 1 was going to have siblings. Not necessarily in the same immediate household, but the children to be born in this community had to have other children who were going to be their siblings, but who were almost certainly not going to be their biological siblings. So the reproductive choice for the person who would bear the pregnancy, whether that person was a male or a female person in the beginning of this process, whoever bore the pregnancy to birthing had a particular kind of reproductive choice, which was to choose a symbiont, another critter who was to be in symbiosis with the human baby for the lifetime of that baby. So the woman who bore Camille 1, in a dream that she had during her pregnancy, chose for Camille 1 the symbiont of the monarch butterfly. The monarch butterflies had part of their range in the area where this community had settled down. Camille 1 at puberty could do many things. Camille 1 could decide to alter its body into male or female or other ways. Camille 1 could choose to stay with whatever body it was birthed with, could partially alter, maybe a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and some of it was going to be irreversible. They'd have to learn to live with consequences. The community was not afraid of a kind of morphological experimentation and thought that that was something that adolescents ought to have the means to do. Camille 1 chose to stay with the symbiosis and to deepen it. And the story begins with the first heir of Camille 1, Camille 2. Camille 2 was born female, and as an adolescent, Camille 2 decided to stay female, but wanted to grow a beard. In Camille 1's lifetime, the symbiotic relationships were not yet at a molecular level. Biological sciences, the technobiological sciences of the community had developed in such a way that by the time Camille 2 was born, it was possible and indeed desirable in the community for the symbionts and the human beings to share bodily substance and to share genetic substance. So at puberty, Camille too decided to have implanted on her face a beard made up of the stem cells that would grow the antennae of butterflies. So that Camille too had a face full of the antennae of butterflies. And the antennae could sense, could taste the air, taste the foods. And Camille too had an enhanced sensory being that she, Z, felt enhanced Z's ability to care for and to care about the ongoing possibilities of the monarchs.
And on that cheeky note, we end this first remote access programme.